It's actually going to be interesting.
But I deal a lot with privacy issues, not specifically medical. They have their own staff of lawyers.
Yeah.
But I deal a lot with privacy and ethical issues, so I thought this would be an interesting
Yeah.
session for me.
Mike Taff, my area of interest is mainly preclinical research, but I do have some projects which have recently sort of touched preferentially, sort of tangentially on human subjects research. And so, particularly when it talks about, we're in drug abuse research, and so if we're going to talk about that aspect of our research, we sort of need to be a little more up to speed on these issues of privacy.
Sarah Crespi, I work for a science society. I do communications for them and also work on the journal publication as well. And I just thought this would be a really interesting conversation to listen in on and maybe participate in.
Yeah. Well, I hope we meet your expectations.
I do IT at Duke University, and I'm also a food blogger, but I just thought it would be an interesting
A food blogger. A food.
I love me some food.
Cool. So Peter, I thought you might want to start with your, my talk is a little bit more sort of general, and you're more focused on medicine per se, so.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to know how some of you, basically I had to start putting together some as more people started to read my blog, I had to think about my own ethics more. Not that I don't already, but for instance, I had a great picture of this guy came in to see me with this, took off his baseball cap and this thing was growing out of his head. And I took a fantastic picture of it with absolutely no identifying characteristics other than the big thing growing out of his head. And I put up a case study about it, and somebody came by, a physician commenter came by and said, do you think maybe there are some issues here as far as HIPAA and as far as ethics? And I immediately took the post down and then wrote a follow-up post on what are the issues of it, because it's actually there aren't easy answers to a lot of those things, but on a much more basic level, I think that most people I deal with a lot of physicians in training, and most of them, they all have Facebook accounts, and none of them have any idea of the implications of their online life. And so a case study, if you will, was one of my residents who's terrific, trying to think of the best way to state this, who put something on a Facebook page about interactions with other staff at the hospital in a state of post-call stress and exhaustion, and not fully thinking through, for one thing, that she happens to have friended everybody at the hospital. So somebody picked up on that and went to the department chair and said, this person's dissing our whole department. And yes, there are certain ethical things there, and there's also certain career things there that can absolutely just be a nightmare. That was 2 years after I proposed that we start talking about Facebook and social networking and been totally ignored. So that's when they started letting me give my talk to the residents. It was after the crisis. There are certain considerations physicians have that others don't. I mean, most of you know this stuff because you're all internet savvy people. But a lot of people don't realize, and a lot of my interns and residents are from all over the country and all over the world, and really young and naive, and do not realize that all of this stuff exists. I mean, they know some of this, but they don't realize that even their eBay account is publicly.
Amazon reviews is another place.
Yeah. So. They don't realize that when they put their name on something that it can show up indexed on Google. I mean, these are just basic things that I teach them, but I want to get into the sort of the whys. Physician, and other professionals have a different, but physicians specifically have HIPAA, which is a law created during the Clinton administration, which, among other things, helps protect patient privacy. So this is sort of the legal aspect, and the big, I am not a lawyer thing, but HIPAA creates a type of information known as is it personal health or protected health information? PHI is the
Protected.
yeah. Basically, any health information that can be reasonably linked to an individual is considered protected, and you have to have releases to be able to, and various studies have shown that if you know, I think, what is it? I think it's like 2 data points, you can identify the patient. You don't need much. All you need is like geography and condition, and you can figure out who the patient is. So it's very easy to figure out who patients are. You have to be extremely careful. And then the other thing is, and this came up in our discussion of my resident's little gaffe was defamation, and we're pretty well off in the States as far as defamation law. You have to be really bad to really lose it with the defamation suit, but still it's out there. But HIPAA is even more important. That's the legal aspect, and there are these ethical responsibilities that physicians have, and I think that some of these, I mean, this is the physician ethical language, but I think a lot of these really extend to other fields, or should. I mean, we all have our own individual quirks, and I assume a librarian has a certain amount of, I don't know their field, but I assume that it's not good to say, Tom Jones just came out and brought out the goat sodomy book, and I assume that would be considered non-ethical for them to do that.
We're very careful about who checks out the goat sodomy. Interesting you know about that title.
I have to consider my residents always say, how did you know about the skin popping marks all over his legs? How did how did you know that you can do that with heroin? It's like, well, you have to know these things. This is so, and like I said, I think this applies. But in order, maintaining a patient's privacy is of utmost importance, because otherwise you lose trust, and the whole deal is off. You almost can't rebuild trust with a patient. I mean, you can, but then there's the principle of autonomy. A patient should have some control of their own information. They should have some reasonable expectation that they control their information to a certain extent, not to the extent they think sometimes. I've had patients call me and say, can you just delete my medical record? And I've said, not really. Why? And they've said, well, I don't want it around anymore, and I own it, don't I? And the answer is, well, yes, but I also own it, and I'm the custodian of these records, and they can't just be, you can't undo it. That's not ethical or legal. So there are limits to that autonomy, but they should be entitled to some basic, control. We have this principle of non-maleficence where we really have to think about, if I want to discuss a patient's care or a patient's case online, or I want to just educate my peers about a case, is there any way in which my presenting this case can harm that patient? So, if I had left the guy with the big thing on his head up online, is there any way that could come back to hurt that patient in ways that you might not even consider? What if somehow his insurance company had somebody really clever and hunted it down and it became a pre-existing condition and kaput? What if his employer found out and found out that it was an HIV-related malignancy, and decided he doesn't like people with HIV-related malignancies and fired him? You better have some good protections in, if you want. I mean, the case, you may have decided this is a good thing to educate other physicians and other people with, but can it actually harm the patient? And that's not acceptable. Beneficence, I mean, are you actually, when you reveal this health information, even masked as it is, are you helping the patient, and are you helping other patients? I mean, the answer to are you helping other patients is usually yes. But are you actually helping your, and often, we have things like tumor boards, so we get together every oncologist, oncologic surgeon, internist in the hospital, and sit down and discuss cases, and that's not considered misuse of protected health information, because you're doing it for the good of the patient. But if you were to extend that to a group of people like you, or on my blog, and I want to present a case to them, am I helping my patient by presenting the case? Well, no. So I have to find a way to create a makeup case.
Something occurred to me. Can I ask you sort of an